Well, hello everybody and welcome to the channel. Today it's another vinyl shootout. It's Analogue Productions' Atlantic 75th Series reissue of Bad Company's Burnin' Sky. It's done on 2 LPs at 45 RPM, and I'll be comparing that to my original 1977 US first pressing promo version. Let's see how that turns out on the Safe and Sound Texas audio excursion. Some of these vinyl shootouts can get quite involved, not only in the number of records that are involved, but just in the listening sessions. And then sometimes when those comparisons are done, the differences are so great that it's just obvious the winners and the losers. And then there's times where things get pretty darn close, and you really got to listen over and over in order to try and establish what are the hallmarks of the differences between the two pressings. Well, Bad Company Burnin' Sky, the release from Analogue Productions versus that original promo, are this latter case, where the original is really very strong. The Atlantic 75th Series from Analogue Productions is too, but at some point you ask the questions, is it worth the price difference? Do I want to deal with 45 RPM on 2 LPs versus 1? And the last one always is, can I get a clean enough original that the advantage in the new one being so almost dead quiet doesn't outweigh the risk in getting old ones? So all of these fall into your decision making. Now for me, I was following Bad Company from their very first release and liked very much their material up till Burnin' Sky. And Burnin' Sky for me is kind of where I started to, I'll say, lose interest or see that maybe I didn't care for the way some of the songs were crafted and the uniqueness some of them had in earlier releases. So for me, going back to Burnin' Sky for this particular video was a bit of a resurrection because I hadn't been listening to it in literally decades. I hear the title track occasionally, but for the most part, I hadn't listened to the LP. So I had to get back into that in the first place. And then with these repeated listens, I realized, well, it's not a bad album, but it certainly wasn't what I had heard in their earlier releases, and I maintain the fact that this isn't exactly one that's going to get a lot of spin time. But for those of you that like the album, and for the fact that we want to have this comparison, let's go ahead and look at what the numbers tell us about the characteristics of these two pressings, and looking at the good, the bad, and the ugly as always. The nature of audio comparisons is that the results presented in this video are fully subjective. They are based on my equipment in my listening room using my hearing capability. Therefore, your results may be different. My effort here is to provide you the relative difference of audio characteristics across various pressings. So we have a situation here of only having 2 records to compare, and right out of the box you can see very quickly that the price difference is pretty strong. I mean, you can pick up the VG Plus of Burnin' Sky for $10, maybe 15, depending. Again, you know, how quiet they are, that we're going to talk about that in a minute, but quite a cheap album to get. Now, as it related to the new one, it's $60, so you're talking 4 to 6 times the price, I would say, for it. Plus, you have the fact that it's a 45 RPM on 2 LPs, which is a little more getting up to change records and breaks up a bit of the flow, as people say. Now, when it came to the relative decibel difference between the two, they were really spot on to each other. That doesn't happen a lot, actually, but they were really, really close, which made it easier because I didn't have to change any settings to make them match and what have you. So their impact right off of the record was very similar as it related to the amount of sound coming at you. Now, for the quietness of the vinyl, the original wasn't bad. It did have some noise on it, but it did render an 8. But again, when we get to these new ones and we get to Analogue Productions, quality, record pressings, capabilities, we're talking something a step up from mass production back in the day, and it yields a 9.5. So clearly, it's not that this record has a lot of passages that are really quiet, but in fact, where you do, it does make a difference, and of course, between tracks. Now, getting into the meat of the actual sound of what was being heard at the bass, mid, and treble area, I'll put those together because they ranked the same for each, with the original yielding a 9. Very decent in its presentation of all of those aspects. A very strong record, actually, in many aspects, and it was not wanting. Of course, when you put on the AP, you did pick up some nuances of things that were a tad stronger. Which is, Chad says we try to do as well or beat the original, and the question is by how much? Well, when an original is done really well, maybe there isn't as much room to grow in that regard. And in this case, that may have been the case, or it may have been the case this was a promo, a first pressing, and really, really fresh. But any way you look at it, the AP definitely had more definition in tightness of the bass, and as it related to the strength of the vocals and the mid-range and the separation there with the treble, which was very well aligned on the capabilities from the original. I mean, the original really had good hits of cymbals and some of your higher-end percussion stuff, but the AP just had a little more shimmer, a little more shine on those aspects of the record. So they were a 9 versus 9.5 in that arena. As it related to the dynamic range, this album isn't the broadest in dynamic range, so there's only so much you can do with that per se from the original 2-track master. But the first release there was very decent at an 8.5, but the AP definitely brought out a little more in that stronger ability to reach down and to reach up in the spectrum of music. So we got an 8.5 for the original, a 9 on the AP. The soundstage and imaging too was a bit restricted, I think, based on the way it was originally recorded. And so although the original got an 8.5, there was a little more wholeness and a little more separation and depth to the AP. That could be because of the efforts related to it being on 2x45 and it giving a little more room to breathe in the grooves to bring something out that wasn't there, or in the remastering aspects that were done by Ryan K. Smith. But all in all, we ended up with an 8.5 for the original and a 9 on the AP. The voices were again something that was lacking a bit, just I think in the recording itself. I don't know if it's the equipment, the microphone equipment, or what have you, or the distance the singers were from the mics, or what it might have been. But some of the voices weren't quite as clear as I would have hoped. But it's an 8.5 for the original, a 9 on the AP. Just a little more resonance to the voice and a little more presence, I would say, on the AP brought forth in that area. So you can see the original did pretty well, actually, and when you bring all the numbers together and you don't factor in this case, for Sonic's average, the quietness of the vinyl, you see that original yielding an 8.75 and the AP a 9.25. So not as much gap as sometimes we see in these particular recordings. When you do factor in the quietness of the vinyl, the original drops a bit to 8.64 and the AP just ekes up a bit to 9.29. So when you look at the cost per rating point, how much it costs for each rating point, you get a lot of value out of that original at $1.14, whereas it's $6.49 per rating point for the AP. So this all boils down to several factors that you're going to have to decide, because these are pretty darn close. Well, life doesn't always present us a slam dunk situation or a straightforward decision, but in this case, it's a little bit easy in the sense that the original is actually pretty strong, and the AP, although besting it, still has to justify, of course, the cost in this. And that is always a decision one has to make. So it's more a matter of where you stand related to liking this album and wanting the very best top copy that you can have, and if you can live with 2 LPs at 45 RPM. That's the decision point. Unfortunately, it isn't always that the thing is so much greater that it's just an automatic decision that that's the one. It isn't always capable to have that opportunity given the original source material, maybe how it was done originally, and what's left on the tape to pull out 40 years later. So it's all factored in. We all have to make those decisions on everything we buy. I hope this at least gave you a relative difference idea so that you can make an informed decision, which is why we're here. Speaking of which, if you haven't subscribed, please consider doing so by clicking on the bell below, and a thumbs up or like is appreciated, as are any comments that you have. So as always, thanks for watching the Safe and Sound Texas Audio Excursion. Take care, everybody.